When we think of New York, at least as outsiders, we think of a few things. Maybe it's the Statue of Liberty, Fifth Avenue, Times Square, the Manhattan icons. Or maybe it's the pockets of quirky cool in Brooklyn or the roller coasters of Coney Island. For some, maybe it's the elevated subway lines that stretch through Queens. But how many of us can, hand on heart, say that when you think of New York, you think of the Bronx? Not many of us, I'd wager. But the Bronx has given New York and the world creations that it would be hard to imagine either without. There's no denying that the Bronx is both a beneficiary and a victim of its own reputation. But I can tell you this, the Bronx is about as New York City as you're gonna get.
I am very obviously a big proponent of learning languages for travel. I truly believe that being able to communicate is the key to unlocking a destination. You can experience exponentially more of a destination's culture and people if you can communicate. And that's great in theory, but how do you actually learn a new language? Well, good news. Today's sponsor, Babbel, is the perfect place to start your language learning journey. Babbel is one of the top language learning apps in the world, so whether you're picking up a new language for the first time or honing your conversational skills in a language you've been dabbling with for a while, Babbel has the content, structure, and process for you. And me. My Spanish isn't great, so I signed up for Babbel, which is scientifically proven to help you start speaking a new language in as little as 3 weeks. And what's great about Babbel is that it teaches you real-world conversations, equipping you with the skills you need to talk about travel and more. Perfect for getting so much more out of your trips. And now, I can finally say, un taco más, por favor, because why wouldn't I want just one more taco? So here's my challenge to you. Sign up for Babbel and start learning. Click on the link in the description below to get a whopping 60% off your subscription. And then, hey, come back and tell us what language you chose and why. I'd love to hear. But until then, hasta luego.
You'll almost certainly be arriving in the greater New York City area via one of its 3 dystopian human processing portals, or airports: JFK, LaGuardia, or Newark. These are not great airports. Actually, that's not fair. LaGuardia has undergone a massive renovation project and is now one of the best airports in the US. JFK is in the middle of a multi-billion-dollar upgrade. And Newark? Well, Newark is in the middle of a multi-year project to suck even more than it already does somehow. I hate that place. Public transport from JFK to the Bronx is a long old slog, and I'd really struggle to recommend it. 2 hours if the planets align. You gotta take the subway all the way into Manhattan and then up to the Bronx. Newark Airport is the same. You gotta take the Newark Airport Express into Manhattan and then the subway up to the Bronx. 1 hour and 45 if everything works out. Even LaGuardia, which you can literally see from the Bronx, somehow takes over an hour on public transport. Yes, it is cheaper, but brace yourself because it takes a long time. The fastest and easiest way to get into the Bronx from JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark is a taxi or rideshare app like Uber or Lyft. If the traffic gods are smiling on you, your journey will take 30 to 40 minutes from Newark, 45 minutes from JFK, and 25 minutes from LaGuardia. This is, of course, depending on where in the Bronx you're going and the traffic conditions. Bear in mind, unlike taxi trips to Manhattan from JFK, there is no flat rate to the Bronx from any of the airports, so expect the journey to cost between $50 and $70 plus tip.
Stand clear of the closing door.
If you're already in Manhattan, getting to the Bronx is actually reasonably straightforward, with the obvious caveat being It depends where you are in Manhattan and where you're trying to get to in the Bronx. The Bronx is served by 7 subway lines that are connected to Manhattan and the other boroughs, and the subway journey from Midtown to the Bronx will take you between 30 and 40 minutes. You can buy a ticket from one of the machines in the station, but frankly, it's way easier to just tap your contactless debit or credit card as you go through the turnstile, or even your smartphone. You'll still get the same base fare and free transfers, and you don't have to battle with the incredibly frustrating, antiquated ticket machines in the stations. The Hudson, Harlem, and New Haven lines of the Metro North commuter rail, all of which originate in the glorious Grand Central Terminal, make various stops throughout the Bronx. And it can often be a better option than the subway, especially if you're going further north in the Bronx, because it makes far fewer stops. So again, depending on where you're trying to get to, evaluate all your options. You can buy your Metro North train ticket from a ticket machine in Grand Central, at a ticket office, on the MTA's Train Time app, which is also good for trip planning and real-time schedules, or on board the train itself. But buying your ticket on the train can cost up to $6.50 more than the regular price. And you can only buy one-way tickets on board, so bear that in mind. Once you're in the Bronx proper, you have a few options for getting around. The Bronx has good subway coverage, but the lines run mainly north to south as they are intended for access to Manhattan rather than crosstown travel in the Bronx. There are a lot of buses, but they can be slow and meandering and often very crowded, especially at rush hour. For those harder to reach corners of this sizable borough, ride-sharing apps like Uber and Lyft work well. But they are expensive. Yes, you can walk, but do not underestimate the size of this borough. Sure, it may be the second smallest behind Staten Island, but that doesn't mean it's not huge, and the distance is intimidating. And unlike the rest of New York City, the Bronx is surprisingly hilly to the point of comparison with San Francisco. But as a last mile option, walking actually works. Many ethnic groups have called the Bronx home over the years. The area around Arthur Avenue is still a center of Italian-American culture in New York, with some of the finest regional Italian food in North America. So, naturally, I find myself smashing the gong at the legendary Pugsley's Pizza, a rite of passage as sacred as it is cathartic. Sal and his wife Pina have been serving pizza with a whole lot of love since the mid-'80s at Pugsley's.
We opened up in 1985.
Once you've had a slice of what they're serving, it's hard to imagine the Bronx without them.
It's a beautiful Pina. She's the reason why everything is so cool here.
Unassuming and nestled on a quiet back street, we stumbled in, much like their largely student clientele from nearby Fordham University, with a zombie-like need for a New York slice. And we were not disappointed.
I don't think there's a better pizza experience, frankly, that I've had ever in this city than Pugsley. I mean, what's not to love about the place, the people, and the pizza? Glorious.
It's hard to leave a place like Pugsley's, but when you eventually do, you will leave with a smile on your face. But the beauty and influence of the Bronx immigrant culture can be seen far beyond Arthur Avenue, with bustling communities from all over the world, from Ireland to Angola. They migrated, they settled, they cooked, and the borough is a patchwork of their influence and ingredients. From the mid-19th century until around 1920, the second language spoken in the Bronx after English was German, believe it or not. From the 1920s until around the 1960s, it was Yiddish, and from the 1960s through today, it was Spanish. Over half of the borough's population are Hispanic or Latino, and when they came, they brought their food with them. All over the Bronx, you can find phenomenal food from that entire region, like this beautiful Dominican food. Chicharron, fried pork, the fat and the skin, most importantly, rice and beans, plantains, every possible variation of every possible home-cooked meal that you could want, and the quality is almost invariably like nothing you will have ever experienced. London has the off-license, Japan has the kombini, and New York has the bodega. Not one is like any other, but yet somehow they're almost all universal in experience, aesthetic, and offering. There are nearly 7,000 bodegas in New York City alone, and many of them are open 24 hours a day. What was started by Spanish immigrants in the 1900s was adopted by New York's Puerto Rican community to stock the flavors and cultural necessities of home. In the late 20th century, the baton was passed to the city's Dominican population. And here we are in the 21st century, and a new generation of bodega owners has emerged. From places like Albania and Yemen, Spanish to Puerto Rican to Dominican to Yemeni. The Bronx in a nutshell. I and millions of others come to bodegas for the food, and I cannot go to one without getting a bacon, egg, and cheese. And there is a specific way of ordering these. It's bacon, egg, and cheese on a roll, salt, pepper, ketchup, except you have to do it in one breath. Bacon, egg, and cheese on a roll, salt, pepper, ketchup. People will invariably ask, well, what's the best bodega in New York City? Where do you get the best bacon, egg, and cheese? And the answer is the one that's closest to wherever it is you're staying. I mean, frankly, they're all amazing. They all follow a pretty uniform formula of what is in one of these and what's not. And they're cheap as well. This is $3. $3 in New York City, one of the most expensive cities in the world, for a hot, satisfying, well-made breakfast. For contrast, in Manhattan this morning, it was $20 for a diner omelet versus $3 for a beautiful bacon, egg, and cheese. You cannot go wrong with these guys on 187th. Really nice guys and amazing bacon, egg, and cheese. Eating bodega treats and pizza from the Bronx finest can be thirsty work. So how about a drink with a side of effervescent personalities?
All of the top legends of hip hop. Hip hop's based right here in the Bronx. As my man Big Pun once upon a time said, we are dead in the middle of Little Italy. So you have Cool Herc, you have Grand Wizard Theater, you have Grandmaster Flash, you have Melly Mel, you have Coke LaRock, you have my man D Nice, you have KRS-One, Big Pun, as I said before, you got Fat Joe. Nowadays you got A Boogie with the hoodie, you got Ice Spice, you got Cardi B. The list just goes on and on and on.
Paul and Anthony Ramirez, owners of, amongst many other wonderful things, the Bronx Beer Hall.
We're brothers, entrepreneurs, born and raised right here in the Boogie Down Bronx.
You know, people still think the Bronx is burning like it was in the 70s and 80s, or we're suffering from a major crack epidemic, or, you know, that the streets are just crumbling and littered and all that. And that's not the case.
The Bronx is New York City's proudest borough. So you go anywhere in the world, anybody's quick to tell you they're straight from the Boogie Down, and like, it's a pride thing, right? A lot of great things come from the Boogie Down. Geographically, the Bronx is the only borough that's attached to the US mainland. So any of the other 5 boroughs are islands. When the floods come, waterfront property, we'll be looking out at the rest of the world.
If you've been paying attention, the floods are coming.
But for the brothers Ramirez, their true passion and expertise is one of the Bronx's most important creations.
New York has always had an influence on cultures around the world, but hip hop specifically, born in the Bronx, has influenced the earth.
Our logo breaks down the 5 elements of hip hop. The B, that's first, that's your MC. Yep. The R goes into the O, that's your DJ. The N, you have negative space filled with a graffiti, with a spray can for graffiti. Then you got your B-boy down on the X. But the 5th element is the Bronx itself. If it wasn't for the Bronx, right? People say it all the time. If it wasn't for the Bronx, this rap shit probably never would be going on. So tell me where you from. Uptown, baby.
Maybe it was luck that took us to the team at the bodega on East 187th. Sal and Pina at Pugsley's, or the irrepressible and utterly charming Ramirez brothers. Or maybe people like them are everywhere in the Bronx, ambassadors of the true spirit of this borough. Generous and enthusiastic to a fault, but also craftspeople, purveyors of what fuels and satisfies this borough. Good people creating good things for the people around them. That's what the Bronx is about.
While the US is getting better, it still does feel a little bit antiquated when it comes to paying for things. You won't be able to use your card nearly as much as you can in, say, Europe or Asia. And remember, when paying your bill in a restaurant or bar, they will bring the bill to you, you give them your card, they take it away, and then bring it back to you with some paperwork to sign. And of course, to add tip to. It's unnecessarily complicated, but that's just how it works here.
We're in the US, so we have to talk about tipping. Whatever you think about this idea, love it or hate it, it's the done thing here. It's mandatory. That means you have to do it. 15% minimum, irrespective of how your experience was. Now, if you hate maths like I do, most restaurant and bar bills will actually have the percentage breakdown at the bottom of your bill. Or you can just look at the tax on your bill and double it. That will give you around 20%. So there you go, pro tip. But is the Bronx an expensive part of the world? Kinda. You can eat like royalty at a bodega or local ethnic eatery for under $15, but you are in one of the biggest and most expensive cities on earth. So with that contrast in mind, let's do the rundown. Cup of coffee will cost you $1.50. Glass of beer will cost you around $7. And for the most reliable indicator of a nation's cost, a good old Big Mac, you're going to pay $5.75. The Bronx may have a reputation, almost a character trait, of being a tough place. When one thinks of the Bronx, one thinks tough, and in many ways, that reputation was earned. And there's enough literature, art, and film to reinforce that reputation 10 times over. During the 1970s and 80s, the Bronx was considered one of the most dangerous places in the US. But those days are long gone. The crime rate declined by over 70% from 1993 to 2010, and today the Bronx is a statistically safe place. But hey, you are in a big borough that is part of a huge metropolis, so a little common sense is required. Things like avoiding dimly lit streets after dark, especially in low traffic areas, that kind of thing. And let's be frank, in a borough this size with this many people, some neighborhoods are going to be safer than others, so do your research. But if you keep your head up, your phone down, and your wits about you, you're going to be just fine. I will be honest with you. The beauty of the Bronx is not immediately apparent. I don't even think it's fair to characterize it as having a charming patina, or those oft-used euphemisms of being up-and-coming or full of character. The Bronx is rough. It pretty much always has been, and I don't think anyone here would argue with that. Yes, of course there are pockets of salubrious serenity in this borough. Of course there are. The Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Garden, City Islands, the shorelines, all perfectly lovely. But the Bronx was forged in fire and fury, and from that crucible, greatness was born and continues to flourish. Hip-hop could only have come from the Bronx. The alleyways of the Bronx are where graffiti was elevated from gang-related vandalism to legitimate art form, and the world is grateful for those indelible contributions. But the real beauty of the Bronx is actually all around you. It's people. If you take a moment to find that common ground, that shared enthusiasm, a new world will open up to you. A borough full of generous, friendly, accommodating, interesting people who will shout about this place for the rest of their days. And as well they should, because the Bronx is a hell of a place.